So we started talking last class about motivation, right? Tell me what motivation is. What is motivation?
What drives you to do something?
Okay, what drives you to do something? Someone else, come on, what's motivation?
Something that meets your needs.
What's that?
Something that meets your needs.
Okay, so what are needs?
Like basic desires or like food, water, etc. Survival.
Okay, so primary needs, right? So what's an example of secondary needs then?
Money.
Okay, money, right? Things that would allow us to fulfill primary needs. So we start talking about drive, right? So what's drive in the context of needs?
It's the tension, so we go after the need to fulfill our desires.
Okay, good. So drive is a psychological tension we feel that pushes us to fulfill these needs, right? So give me an example. Hunger, right? Hunger is a need. We must eat. Despite what the human Barbie says, have you guys seen this woman, the actress out of Ukraine,
No.
Russia, West, former part of it? She claims that she does not need to eat, that she's able to live off air.
I kid you not. I was just about to mention that because I read that today. Whenever you said that, and that's so weird.
There was one about the sun. Like the lady
Yeah, there's a lady on
could eat
Livestock. She
sun.
was like, I eat the sun, and she just stands outside and stares at the sun, and she's like, I take me those vitamin D.
Delicious.
Yeah.
All right, so one must eat, right? Hunger is a need. Okay, we are driven to reduce that feeling. Okay, so one of the original, one of the first theories of motivation we talked about was drive reduction theory. That needs create in us a push. Right, we are driven to reduce that psychological tension that's associated with the need. And we talked about primary and secondary drivers. What's the problem with this theory, though? Why can this theory not explain all behavior? Yeah.
Isn't it like something like with like mountain climbing and everything? Like you don't want to. Why would you like? You mentioned it last class.
I did.
Can't remember exactly. I know. It
And I
has something to do
appreciate
with
that
rock
somebody.
climbing. I know it had to do with rock climbing. I don't really. It was like exertion or something.
Okay.
Isn't it like why you keep eating once you're full? Like
Okay. Here's another example, right? The idea that we keep eating once we're full. We're full, right? According to this theory, as soon as that need is sort of taken care of, we should stop the behavior, right? So once we're full, we should stop eating, right? And well, here we go, right? Thanksgiving's coming up. That as soon as something like this happens, you don't stop. You're not hungry, but you keep eating. And then the sensation seeking, right? This theory can explain why it is that so many people seek out activities that increase arousal in people, right? Okay, so we talked about need for achievement, need for affiliation, need for power. We started talking about locus of control. Back to motivation, okay? Tell me what intrinsic motivation is and what extrinsic motivation is.
Extrinsic is a person forms an action because it leads to an outcome that is separate from or external to the person.
All right, so outside the context of the definition, what does that mean?
But doctors or lawyers, they need those things.
What, say it again?
Doctors or lawyers, they need a profession because they make a lot.
Okay, for someone, good. So like somebody who became a doctor or a lawyer because what they wanted to do was earn a lot of money. They're driven to engage in that behavior, doctoring, lawyering, because of the sort of financial compensation they get for engaging in that particular behavior. So how is that different from intrinsic motivation? Yeah.
Like say if they're a doctor, they end up like they do it because they want to help people. They don't do it for the money. They do it because they like it.
Okay, so when we're intrinsically motivated to do something, the action in and of itself is rewarding, right? So many people volunteer their time. Does somebody who volunteers typically get some type of intrinsic sort of reward for doing that, right? Yes, I'll answer my own question. That intrinsic motivation, right? The act of volunteering feels good for that individual. They're not being compensated. They're not getting some monetary compensation for it. But the act of volunteering, helping people in need, is rewarding to them. We spent some time last class talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What is Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Did we get there?
Yeah, right before that.
Oh, we did. Okay. Let's do it. Who has seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs before?
That's not his right.
What is it all about? Yeah.
But it's like the base. It's like a pyramid, and then the base of it is like what you need, like for essential everyday things. And as soon as you fulfill one set of needs, you move up, kind of, and then
Okay.
as soon as you fulfill, like completely fulfill one section, like you move up a tier. And
All right, good. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay, is all about how it is that we can sort of reach our full human potential. Okay, when we have reached this term that he used called self-actualization, it's where we have satisfied all of these sort of lower needs, basic necessity needs, and we are able to achieve our full human potential. It's seldom reached, seldom achieved for a lot of people, right? So we have these sort of moments in our time, moments in our lives that Maslow referred to as peak experiences. These moments in our lives when we have sort of temporarily at least reached this point of self-actualization. We have reached our full human potential. Okay, so looking at the model, perhaps this makes more sense. In order to get all the way towards the top, and he's put this new, there's been this new point that's put on the top, I'll talk about in a second. But in order to reach our full human potential, there are basic things that need to be met for us to sort of gain this ability. The very bottom being that we have our physiological needs met. We're not hungry. We're not thirsty. We're not sort of overall fatigued in our day-to-day lives, right? So we have food, we have drink, we have shelter. Some of those basic physiological needs are met. When they're met, then we start feeling about safety. We start looking towards safety needs, feeling like we are secure, safe. We are out of harm's way. So once we have these met, we start moving towards things like belongingness, right? And love, to be with other individuals, to feel that we are accepted by other individuals, that we belong with them. So once these needs are met, we move to esteem needs, where we try to achieve something. We try to be competent, gain approval and recognition for the things that we can do. We're not worried about these things if we're concerned about when we will eat again, or when we're going to have the ability to have a drink again, or something like this. Okay, so once our esteem needs have been met, we move to cognitive needs, to know the world around us, to understand things around us, to be able to explore our environments. And so when we have these cognitive needs met, we start moving to needs of aesthetic needs. So appreciating beauty, right? Order, symmetry in the world, like art type of activities. And that self-actualization needs at this point can start being fulfilled, right? We have those moments where we realize our full human potential. Okay, anybody studied Buddhism? Ever heard the term bodhisattva? No? Okay. What is Buddhism all about? Okay? Becoming one and nothing at the same time. Becoming completely selfless, right? When somebody has sort of what they call nirvana, right? The drive is to reach enlightenment, right? To be an enlightened individual. A bodhisattva is someone who has attained enlightenment but comes back to help other individuals on their path towards enlightenment, right? So in the context of the Buddhist faith, when they're talking about bodhisattvas, that's what they're talking about. So check this out. This sort of revision of this original model has put this transcendence needs at the top. And so when somebody who has attained their full human potential, they have the ability to reach this other pinnacle, to go a step up. And in this particular step, what these self-actualized individuals are trying to do is to help others achieve self-actualization. Right? So what types of behaviors or activities can this person engage in to help other people on their path towards being self-actualized, meaning fulfill their full human potential? Okay, so in thinking about this model, right? It's not like once this is met, like, you know, once we are self-actualized, we stay there permanently. Right? What can always happen to us is we're knocked back down in the sort of hierarchy of needs, right? Think about people who lose a job, right? Who can no longer pay for the mortgage on their house, who end up losing their house or something. They may have been a self-actualized individual, but they're being knocked down because of some of the circumstances that have happened in their life. You with me? So once you move up these steps, it's not like you'll never have to be concerned about these things again, or these needs aren't sort of relevant to you anymore. There are things that can happen that knock us back down. Questions on Maslow's hierarchy of needs? How many of you have seen this before? Where? Like in high school? All right. All right, so another theory of motivation is this idea of self-determination theory. And self-determination theory says that we have three inborn needs, right, that can help us gain this complete sense of self. So when we have these things, three needs met, it helps us push towards this complete sense of who we are. One is autonomy. So we have control over our behavior and goals in our life, right? That we're not sort of under somebody else's control, that we're able to control and direct our own behavior, seek out and attain our own goals. 2, competence. We need to feel that we are able to sort of master the challenges that life throws our way, that we're a competent individual. Once I strive for something, I have the ability to attain it. And 3rd, relatedness. So we need to feel that we have a sense of belonging, right? That we have this intimate and close relationships, secure relationships with other individuals. When these 3 needs are met, according to the self-determination theory, we're able to develop this sort of complete sense of self, right? This healthy perception of who we are as an individual. And we talk a lot about intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is important in the context of this theory, right? All right, we're gonna segue. Let's talk about hunger. And talking about hunger, we have to talk about sort of, as a society, we are becoming more and more obese. You're aware of this, yes? Although actually levels is starting to plateau. It's like we've hit this limit. Now kids are stopping this rise in obesity. That's good. So what do we do? What do we do to combat rates of obesity? What do people do?
They stopped selling supersize at McDonald's.
Did they stop?
What?
Did they stop selling supersize at McDonald's?
Yeah,
They did?
They sell larges, but they don't sell supersize. That's something going on for a while.
I'm not a frequent McDonald's shopper.
Yeah.
So is large like just the supersize? They just named it something different?
I don't know.
All right, so what else do we do? What are people doing?
Exercising.
All right, let's push towards exercise more.
Healthy eating.
Healthy eating? Yeah.
Reduce stress in your life.
What's that?
Reduce stress.
Okay, one idea is stress, that people are eating more as a way to cope with stress. Good.
Developing better sleeping habits.
Okay, developing better sleeping habits. Yeah, metabolism has been linked to poor sleep, right? People who are overweight tend to have poor sleeping patterns, sleeping behaviors. You guys are going the less controversial one. Usually I get things like liposuction, pills, various surgeries. All right, so when we talk about obesity, what does it mean to say that someone is obese? Yeah. Not to be just obese. It's 20% over where they should be, right? 20% over where they should be. Okay, let's take a step back, right? So what are these things that impact hunger levels in individuals? At a hormonal level, we have things like insulin, right? Insulin and some other related hormones. What they do is they sort of are cues to tell our body when we are hungry, and what some other hormones do is tell our body when we've had enough. So insulin reduces the level of glucose that exists in our bloodstream. Why is there a push to have this sort of low-carb diet? You ever thought about this? Carbs are sugars, so what do they release a ton of? Insulin. Right, so low-carb diets, the idea is that our body would produce less insulin. Right? So as soon as our body becomes exposed to food, we talked about this the other day, right? Certain foods, it'll release these hormones in response. Glucagon increases level of glucose in the bloodstream. And then one of the issues they've been looking at a lot lately is leptin, right? What leptin does to us is when it's released, it tells the hypothalamus that the body's had enough food, right? So now it's going to reduce feelings that we are hungry, right? There seem to be some people who are less responsive to leptin. So although their body is producing it, they're not getting that signal that I'm full, okay? And some of the surgeries they've done on rats, they've been able to make them completely immune to this hormone. What do you think happens to rats? larger and larger. All right, hypothalamus plays a very big role in hunger. Weight set point, this idea again about this thermostat, that our body has a certain point that it likes to be at. It's a level of weight that our body is trying to maintain. Our basal metabolic rate is the rate at which our body burns energy when the organism is resting. Right? So there's a certain amount of calories everyone needs to consume to maintain their weight. If you eat under that, what happens to us? We'll start to lose weight. If you eat more calories than you need, what happens to you? You gain weight, right? You gain weight, right? Here it is, right? So here we have a female who is 5.5 feet. How many calories should she consume? So the recommended between 10 and 18 years of age is 1,770. Right? As we get older, what happens to our metabolism? It slows down, right? We need less and less calories. So this is the number of calories that a person needs to consume every day to maintain their weight without exercise. Right? So just maintain your weight. 19 to 30, 1,720 calories. 31 to 60, 1,623. And then 61 to 80, 1,506. Almost 250 calories less per day than when she was younger. We get the average male who is 6 feet. 10 to 18 years of age, 2,140. 19 to 30, about 2,071. 31 to 60, 1,934. And 61 to 80, 1,770. So when Michael Phelps was training for the Olympics, do you know how many calories he was eating every day? It was almost 12,000 calories a day he was eating, right? But he was working out like crazy. That's what he needed. All right, so this is what you would need to eat just to maintain those levels. All right, so why do we eat many times when we're not hungry? Part of it is we have a lot of social cues that sort of give us the feeling that we should be eating. We have cultural customs, right? Here in the United States, we have a lot of cultural customs coming up. What do we do with Thanksgiving? Stuff ourselves. What do we do at Christmas? What do we do around New Year's Day? We have these cultural customs where food is a big part of the things that we do during those particular holidays. We have food preferences. What do people prefer to eat? Sweets, right? Sweet food. From an evolutionary, what'd you say?
I said salt and sugar.
Salt and sugar. From an evolutionary perspective, why would this make sense? What?
Because of like the matter that it's sugar and it produces more insulin.
Okay. So during human evolution, what was one of the things we had to be concerned about? Access to what? Food, right? So during tough periods of food growth, why would it be good to be heavy? In case you can't eat for a while, right? A lot of evolutionary psychologists say that's like obese people may be saving up for the big famine that's not going to come, right? Okay, so we have these food preferences for sweet food. And as was mentioned earlier, people use food as a comfort, right? Makes them feel good, or as some type of escape from unpleasantness. If you look at some individuals and ask them to simply think about eating a pizza or something, their body will respond to the anticipation of eating by producing an insulin response, right? Just thinking about eating can produce this insulin response in people. What is it? What have we already talked about that would explain why it is that this happens to people? Yes?
Classical conditioning.
Bingo. Classical conditioning, right? It's a great example of how easily we are classically conditioned, right? That simply thinking about food has this response in us. All right, so obesity, as we talked about, is when an individual's body weight is 20% or more over what it should be, right? So looking at, ideally, where this person's weight should be for their height, right? There are some variations across definitions for obesity, but for the most part, it is 20%, right? So we have biological causes that can cause people, that lead people to be obese. Things like heredity, hormones, slowing metabolism with age. If we don't adjust our caloric intake as we get older, we're gonna get heavier, right? Because we don't need that much food. Overeating is a major factor for obesity. People just simply eating too much. And here's the rats. Right, so here is our obese rat. What happens is for this obese rat, they're not getting that leptin signal anymore. They're not getting the signal that they're completely full. They should stop eating. So they'll eat and they'll eat and they'll eat and they'll eat. These are out of order. Go back. So what's anorexia nervosa? Your book doesn't necessarily go into a lot of detail about eating disorders. Let's quickly talk about eating disorders. Yeah. Okay. So starving themselves, right? Starving themselves. So when somebody is 15% below their ideal body weight, here we have somebody who's anorexic. What's bulimia? Yeah.
Whether binge on food and then throw it up.
Okay. Up to 50,000 calories in a single sitting for somebody who has bulimia. So they'll consume an incredible amount of food and then intentionally throw this food up, right? So that binging and purging activity. So possible signs that you should look for that somebody might have an eating disorder. Dramatic weight loss in a relatively short period of time, right? Obsession with calories and food content of food. So a little more than just being sort of cognizant and aware of one's caloric intake. Hiding food in strange places. Hair loss, pale appearance to the skin. What's up with hair loss? Or this pale appearance to the skin? What's happening? What?
They're sick.
Okay, they're sick. Yeah.
They're not keeping the nutrients in their bodies.
Okay. All right. So they're not giving their body the nutrients they need, and your body will find it. Your body will take it, and it'll take it from places like your hair and your skin, right? So somebody who has someone that's anorexic, a lot of times their hair will appear very straw-like, okay? As part of their body taking nutrients that it needs. Bruised or calloused knuckles, bloodshot eyes, light bruising under the eyes, frequent trips to the bathroom following meals, obsession with continuous exercise, wearing baggy clothes to kind of hide one's body shape, reading books about weight loss and eating disorder, or complaints of often feeling cold, right? Are some of the signs that somebody has an eating disorder. Questions on eating disorders? All right. When we talk about emotion, this is the last section of chapter 9. Right? When we talk about emotion, we're talking about this sort of feeling aspect that people will talk about. Right? There are three things that are inherent when we talk about emotions. One is physical arousal, right? We're having a physiological response. So if we're experiencing fear, what happens to us? Physiologically, what happens to people when they're experiencing fear? Pupils dilate.
Their heart starts racing.
The heart starts racing. What else? What?
Sweating.
Right, sweating. Breath quickens. Right. So emotions often have this physiological component to them. Right. Some type of physical arousal. We have behaviors. We have behaviors that reveal to the outside world that we are experiencing some type of emotion. Right. So if someone's sad, what might happen? What's the behavior that shows somebody's sad? The cry, right? This outward expression that shows the world what one's emotional experience is. Okay, so we have physiological arousal. We have a behavior that shows the world the emotion that we're experiencing. 3, we have an inner awareness of our feelings, right? Somebody understands what the emotional experience is that they're having. All right, so looking at how the brain is sort of, the role the brain plays in various aspects of emotion. Here we're talking about a lot about the physiology, the physical arousal one experiences in these situations. The amygdala, right, has a very strong role. And in particular, the amygdala seems to have a very keen response in fear conditioning. We have emotional stimuli seem to travel to the amygdala both by some fast or crude low road, meaning that it seems to happen almost instantaneously. We have a sort of emotional response that is instantaneous. So we haven't really thought a lot about the emotional experience we should have in this situation. It happens almost instantaneously. And then we also have a slower, but a more involved cortical high road here. Here is, we're engaging in cognitive activity about whatever this is, right? Thinking a lot about this emotional experience. Right, and they seem to be taking different routes here in the brain. All right. There are differences in the hemisphere. Right? Depending upon which hemisphere becomes activated, we may see different emotional experiences. Looking at the front lobes, right? The frontal lobes seem to play some responsibility here. When the left frontal lobe is activated, it is activated more when we have sort of pleasant emotional experiences. The right frontal lobe becomes activated more during negative emotional experiences. So there seems to be some frontal specialization for the type of emotional experience that we are having. And these two brain areas here, they seem to be involved as our sort of regulation, ability to control emotions or emotional expressions. Right, we have facial expressions that seem to vary across cultures. But for many facial expressions, they seem to be universal. We understand by the expression of somebody's face what the emotional experience is that they have. For reasons why we see this sort of universal tendency in people, it's easily explained through something like evolution. Right? We have evolution expectations and evolutionary framework that we can look at why it is and makes sense that happiness looks the same across the world. Why distress or sadness looks the same across the world. Right? We adapted, and in many ways, these things became universal. We all show these tendencies. We have display rules. When it's okay to show our emotions to other individuals. A lot of cultural comparisons, looking at Japanese culture and United States, right? We have very different sort of display rules culturally for what is okay, right? For many people in collectivistic cultures, Eastern cultures like Japan, they don't show their emotions in public, right? We are much more emotionally expressive here. And Mediterranean cultures are much more emotionally expressive than we are, right? But we do have some differences here. And we have display rules for what is okay and what is not okay in the United States. If I tell you I saw somebody crying on campus today, who are you likely to envision crying? What? A girl, right? Why? Why are you much more likely to envision a girl crying than a boy? Excuse me, men and women. You guys are not boys and girls. You guys are college students. Why would you picture a woman? Why are you more likely to picture a woman crying than a man?
There's like a stigma about men crying.
All right, so we have this sort of societal stigma about men that cry, right? Is it more socially accepted for a woman to cry in public than it is a man to cry in public? Absolutely, right? I mean, there's some situations like at a funeral or something when those things. But for the most part, we have sort of expectations for what is okay and what is not okay. So we have these display rules. Who should be able to express these emotional experiences and who should not? We have our labeling of emotion, right? How it is that we choose to describe the emotional experience that we are having, right? We have to interpret this feeling that we have. We give it a label. I'm scared, I'm happy, joyful, whatever it is, right? And we have cultural differences here. If you look at what people describe as pleasant experiences, in Japan, in a collectivistic culture, versus here in the United States, we see differences. For Japanese, their description of feeling pleasant, or feeling happy, is when they feel socially engaged, when they feel that they are accepted by other individuals, right? Strong social connections. When Americans describe feeling pleasant or happy, it's more likely to be a sort of emotional experience that we could call disengaged, disconnected from other people. When I feel I'm better than you, I'm proud of something that I have done, right? I scored the highest, grade in the class. That makes me feel better than you, right? So for a lot of Japanese individuals, it's the social connections that become important in the sort of labeling of an experience. For Americans, it's sort of oftentimes this disengaged feeling, disconnected from other individuals, feeling better than other individuals. All right, so some of the facial expressions that do show this sort of universal feature that we're all able to pick up on. All right, so what's this guy up here in the corner? What is he experiencing?
Unhappy.
He's angry. He's pissed, right? What about this guy?
Weirded out.
What?
Looks weirded out. He's like,
Bath salts. Fear. Fear here, right? What about over here? Disgust in some way. We have happiness. We have surprise. We have sadness, right? These are some of the emotions that are universal, despite the culture somebody grew up in. When seeing these expressions, we can all tell exactly what it is that this person is experiencing. So how do we experience emotions, right? What plays a part in our emotional experiences? According to common sense theory of how emotion comes about, we encounter a stimulus, something in our environment, and that leads to emotion, which leads to bodily arousal and response. So here we go, right? I come across this snarling dog. I have a fear response, right? I'm experiencing fear. My sort of physiological reaction happens here. It's the second response. Snarling dog, fear, physiological response, right? So a statement that would be made that supports this theory would be, I'm shaking because I'm afraid. So we have this emotional experience and then a physiological arousal that happens sort of afterwards. You with me? Okay. So we're going to talk about several different theories of how emotion works. The things they will have in common will be the physiological arousal, the labeling, and the sort of when the stimulus experience happens here. Okay. And the James Lange theory of emotion, here we have a physiological reaction that leads to the labeling of an emotion. Okay, so we come across a snarling dog, right? I have a physiological response to the snarling dog, and I label that fear, okay? The other one does it the opposite way. That I come across a snarling dog, I have fear, and then I have a physiological response. This says it doesn't work that way, it works like this. I have an encounter with a snarling dog. I have a physiological response, and I label it. Okay? All right. This theory has some things that suggest that it might not be the best theory when it comes to emotion. According to this theory, to experience that emotion, okay, we have to have this physiological arousal, this change in body regulation in some way. Okay? There are people who don't have this. So somebody who has damage to a spinal cord or is paralyzed, can't feel from a certain part of their body, right? Many of them, according to this theory then, shouldn't have emotional experiences that are on par with somebody who has sort of full body awareness when it comes to physiological changes. When somebody has lost this ability, they will still report emotional experiences in the exact same way. You with me? So this theory doesn't hold up a lot to some of the issues that we'll see. Okay, so I'm afraid because I'm shaking, right? Or I'm in love because my heart rate goes up when I see her, right? Or I am embarrassed because my face is red. This physiological change that I've experienced. So labeling after the change. The Cannon-Barr theory assumes that some of these things happen at the exact same time. So our physiological reaction and our emotional experience are happening simultaneously, right? So I encounter the snarling dog, there's some subcortical brain activity, thalamus, and simultaneously I have a physiological response and emotional experience. So the argument here then is these things happen at the exact same time. All right, the cognitive arousal theory says that both the physical arousal and the labeling of that arousal based on cues from the environment, have to occur before our emotion is experienced. Right? Here's what Schachter and Singer did. You encounter this snarling dog, this stimulus experience. You have a cognitive appraisal, right? That coincides with the physiological change. What is happening? What is going on in my environment that is causing me to feel this way? These things happen, and then we have an experience of emotion. Some of the early work that these two guys are doing, Schachter and Singer, if you were a participant in their study, they would bring you into a room and give you epinephrine. They wouldn't tell you what it does to you. What does epinephrine do to you?
It slows down your heart rate.
What?
Does it slow down your heart rate or does it speed it up?
No. Speeds up your heart rate, increases your lung activity, gives you like butterfly feeling in your stomach. Right? So they give you that epinephrine so that you have a physiological response. You have physiological arousal. So what they do is they would bring you into this room, they would give you this shot of epinephrine, in a room with somebody who's part of the experiment. Okay? You would go into this room, and you'd be asked to complete a survey. And what the other person did in this room was a sort of independent variable. In one condition, the person acted crazy. Right? They would make like paper airplanes, and they'd laugh and make jokes about the researcher and stuff like that. In the other experiment, the person got pissed. They'd slam the survey around, say this is ridiculous. Why are we doing this sort of thing? So the person was obviously violent and angry. Okay, and then they would ask the participant how they were feeling. Okay, so what they're trying to look at is based upon the physiological arousal and what this person was experiencing in their environment, how would they describe the emotional experience that they were having? Okay, so the people in the happy condition, how did they describe what was going on? This guy was acting like a goofball. Were they having fun? Yeah. It was how they described this emotional experience was like joyful. In the condition where the person is acting crazy, they're very upset, they would describe that as sort of anger, that emotional experience as anger. So what Schachter and Singer were trying to do was sort of this right here, right? To highlight the importance of paying attention to what is going on in the environment as these things are happening, for understanding my emotional experience. Okay, so the facial feedback hypothesis says that literally what our face is doing becomes connected to the emotional experiences that we are having, right? So your mom telling you to smile all the time because it will make you happier, stuff like that, right? Some of the work that's looking at this is done in Germany. And what they'll do in Germany is they'll bring people in to watch cartoons. Have we talked about this already? I must have talked about this in social. Bring people in to watch cartoons, and they will give you a pen and tell you to either hold the pen between your teeth, which makes you do what? Smile, or to wrap your lips around the pen with it in your mouth. What does that force you to do? What? Frown, right? So then you watch like a half an hour of cartoons, and then you're supposed to rate how hilarious the cartoons were after you watch them, okay? The difference is that some people are smiling as they watch the cartoons, and other people are forced to frown while they're watching the cartoons. Who do you think finds the cartoons really funny? The people smiling. Who's not so amused by these cartoons? The people that are frowning, right? There's something about what is going on with our face that's sort of playing a role in our emotional experiences, okay? So we encounter the snarling dog. We have arousal that's associated with what we make as a facial expression, which gives us a cognitive interpretation for what is going on in the labeling of that sort of emotional experience, right? Literally, what our face is doing can sort of play a role in the emotional experiences that we're having. Cognitive mediational theory says that a stimulus must be interpreted or appraised by a person in order for a physical response and an emotional reaction to occur, right? So in this model, we come across a snarling dog. We appraise what's going on here, right? We try to make sense of the situation. Look, there is not a fence between me and this dog. This is a bad situation for me to be in, right? We have fear and then a bodily response here. You understand? Snarling dog behind a fence, I don't care. That snarling dog, now I see this as a threatening situation. Are you with me? So making sense here, appraising what is going on in this particular situation. The last few slides next to one another. We're not going to stop. I'm going to keep going. Let me ask you a question. How did you learn about sex? So many of you just quickly look down. The mention of sex still does that to you? How did you learn about sex? Oh. Friends? Right? Friends are always a good source of information when it comes to sex, right? Have you guys seen the movie Knocked Up? My God, the first few minutes of that movie are, the entire movie is funny, right? So when they're talking about, like, position could play a role in whether or not a girl gets pregnant, right? Like, one of the friends says, well, you know a girl can't get pregnant if she's on top because of gravity and stuff. And they're all like, oh yeah, that's right. Friends are sometimes a terrible source of information. Okay, so we have friends as a possible source of information about sex. Where else? What? Oh, shows, TV, the media? All right, so what the media tells us about sex? All right, so friends, the media. The internet. All right. All right. When I was in grad school, somebody gave a presentation that was about the media and sex, and in her presentation, there was like the song that played in the background. It was like all I remember about the song is like the chorus was "The internet was made for porn." I don't think that's true, but it kind of fit with what she was doing. Yeah.
I was gonna say porn. I was just gonna say it.
Okay, so we have friends, media, internet, porn. What else? Where else? Yeah. Family members? Okay, so did some of you have parents that spoke to you about it? Yeah? No? I got sat down with my dad who had a medical dictionary. We went through the process, and I'm like, what? The only thing I actually remember is that as he was talking to me, my little brother was in the room playing with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, completely oblivious to the conversation my dad and I were having.
School, sex ed.
Okay, here we go. Finally, school, sex ed, right? What was your school sex ed program like?
Stupid.
Other than stupid.
I didn't have one.
You didn't have one at all?
No.
Did you go to public or private?
Public. I went to Keystone X.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How old are you?
19.
Mine was like part of our gym class, and he showed us pictures of STDs. That was like the whole thing.
Okay. All right. So your sex education experience was like, don't do this because you'll have worse that growing.
It's basically like Mean Girls, don't have sex, you'll get pregnant and die.
And see.
What?
I know. I know what it is, but I've not taken time to watch it.
That stuff is a legendary movie.
All right. So sex ed. What about the rest of you? What was your sex education program like in school?
We just got shown a woman having birth video.
That was your sex ed program?
They just have a permission slip and then that's it. It was awful.
We played games.
It was like
I don't know. That's all
I'm
we
gonna need
did.
more.
I don't know. I
What
can't
kind of games
remember.
do you play in sex
I
ed?
don't know. We match things and stuff. I don't know. I can't remember. I just remember every time we played games.
We
Every
match
time.
stuff?
No, with like matching things.
Yeah. What did you
I
match?
don't remember. I don't know. I have my sex lady's number if you want to call her. She
I'm
made
good.
us put it all in our phones, and I don't know. You know, your contacts get transferred over. Well, I saw her in the store one day, and I was like, "Hey, I know you." And she was like, "Yeah, you saw my number," and I was like, "I don't know," and I found it. It was still in my phone.
Okay.
Her name's Renee.
I don't know, Renee. All right. Did any of you have a completely different sex ed experience? Yeah. What was yours like?
I know to fill out diagrams and stuff, like the parts, all that.
Like,
Okay.
sex ed never had anything to do with sex. It was just like,
Like physical health?
yeah.
All right.
And then
Miles,
all
what was your
sex
like?
ed, though.
Yeah.
We read a little bit, did a packet, and then we just made jokes for us to play.
they have speakers come into our school so our teachers wouldn't have to talk about it.
Okay.
It wasn't very thorough.
What are you shaking your head for?
Huh?
What was yours like?
Mine was like kind of like health class. Just learned about, and I mean physiology. You learn about reproductive systems and for male, female, like menstrual cycles and stuff like that. So.
How many of you had an abstinence-only sex ed class? You ever go to a private school? Or are you guys all public school graduates? All public? Okay, well that's good. None of you had an abstinence-only program. That's what they were for many years. What did an abstinence-only sex ed program look like? Don't do it. Right? Just don't. I mean, you guys aren't that far out of your adolescence years, teen years. Somebody tells you not to do something, and of course you don't do it, right? So what do you think a good sex education program looks like? If you had to create a sex education program, what would yours look like? What do you know now that you didn't know earlier that maybe you wish you'd known?
Actions and consequences.
Okay, good. Actions and consequences. What else? I'll tell you this. The research on abstinence-only programs suggests that they are completely ineffective. They do, shocking, right? They do not work. So what do you think a good sex education program looks like?
Telling them about it,
What?
like explaining it, going through it.
Okay.
I was gonna say like lead away from like the whole STD thing and more on like not real consequences because those are real, but like more of the like pregnancy and responsibility you'll have if something goes wrong.
And
Okay.
don't say like not to do it, but actually give them like, I'm gonna bring up Mean Girls again, but at the end she's like, okay, now everybody take some rubbers. Be safe.
Okay, you're onto something.
Like, say some ways, safer techniques in having sex, so it's forms of sex.
Okay. All right. So a good sex education program. What the research shows is a good sex education program is a comprehensive program. It tells people what sex is, right? But it also tells people how to protect themselves, right? So a comprehensive sex education program would teach people how to put a condom on, right? But it also teaches It also teaches people effective decision-making strategies, right? How do I make good decisions? It talks to people about what a healthy relationship looks like, right? So that they understand what a strong, close, intimate relationship should look like, right? Okay. In many ways, that's the kind of sex education program that people will completely freak out about, right? Despite all of the research that suggests this is the foundation for what a sex education should look like. An effective sex education program talks about what it is. It talks about ways to protect yourself as well as protect your partner. Yes, they're going to talk about STDs because those are very real consequences, but also that effective decision making, right, is critically important. All right, so sex and gender. We've already talked a little bit about some of the differences between sex and gender. Chapter 10, we're going to talk about a lot more of what those differences are. Right? Okay, so some of the learning objectives here. We're going to talk about the physical differences that exist between males and females. We'll talk about what gender is and how biology and sort of what we learned from society relate to our gender role development. Right? So we talk about roles, R-O-L-E, in psychology. We're talking about expectations for behavior. So whether it's talking about gender roles, right? When we talk about gender roles, we're talking about those things that we expect boys to do or men to do, and those things that we expect women to do or girls to do. We'll talk about how these gender roles develop and how they can be influenced by stereotypes that people have about men and women. We'll look at how men and women differ in the ways that they think and some of the social behaviors that we engage in. We'll look at personality differences that exist between men and women. We'll look at literally what happens to the bodies of women and men when we're having sex, right? During sexual intercourse, what happens to people? We'll look at some of the early work on human sexual behavior and what that early work suggests that isn't really that different from what a lot of the modern surveys about human sexual behavior tell us. We'll look at sexual orientations, right? We'll talk about what sexual orientations are and also how our sexual orientations develop. We'll look at the physical and psychological, how physical and psychological sexual problems differ. We'll look at what they call STIs, right? Now it's this movement away from sexually transmitted diseases and sexually transmitted infections. Sounds nicer, right? And what we can do to prevent the spread of these particular things. I will do something in addition that is not in your book. It's something I did. I used to teach human sexuality at a community college in Orange County, California, and it was massive. I did it with a sex therapist. I taught the class with a sex therapist in Santa Monica, and we team taught it. We taught it to 175 students on this big auditorium. And one of the things I like to talk about were paraphilias. You guys know what a paraphilia is? You might like this then. Okay. I'm not going to start there. I'll work my way up to the paraphilias. So let's look at how men and women differ. Literally, the sort of physical side of human sexuality. Okay? How men and women differ. Our primary sex characteristics are the structures that are present at birth that play a sort of direct role in reproduction. Female sex characteristics, things like the vagina, right? The tube that leads from the outside of a female's body into the opening of the womb. The uterus, the womb in which the baby grows during pregnancy. And then ovaries, the female sexual glands, right? These are the primary sex characteristics that women have. For men, the primary sex characteristics: the penis, the male sex organ; testicles, the male sex gland; scrotum, just the external sac that holds the testes; and prostate gland, the gland that secretes most of the fluids that contain the male sex cells, or what we know as sperm. I assume I don't need to point these things out for you, since you've had your biology classes in high school. You had somewhat of a sex education program, right? So literally some of the differences that we see between men and women, right? Again, the physical side of human sexuality. The people walking by who like turned and looked once they saw the PowerPoint slide up. We talked a lot already about when sort of sex differentiation occurs in newborn babies, right? Up to 6 weeks, all newborn babies what? No. They don't have a sex. They have the ability to develop according to either pattern. At 6 weeks, introduction of androgen, the most common one that you know, I'm sure that you've heard of, is testosterone, is entered into the womb. It's at this point that sexual differentiation starts to occur. Until that point, every newborn, every in utero baby has the ability to become a boy or a girl, right? Okay, so we have both systems. Depending upon what happens around 6 weeks, we have one system that develops and the other one sort of starts to diminish. Okay, secondary sex characteristics are sexual organs and traits that develop at puberty. They're sort of indirectly involved in human production, right? Indirectly, in the sense that they may act as attractants to the opposite sex, right? Which sort of ensures sexual activity and reproduction. But they don't have a sort of direct role in human reproduction, right? All right, so for females, what we see is growth spurts, right? For the development of the secondary sex characteristics. Menarche, which is the onset of the woman's period, right? That she's able to start having kids. And the period is that sort of monthly shedding of the blood and tissue that lines the uterus, right? The body flushes it out every month, obviously. The body is preparing itself to be able to carry kids. So when conception doesn't occur, it flushes body out. And in breast development, right? A woman's breasts start to develop. In the mammary glands that are going to be able to sort of produce milk when a woman gives birth to an infant. Okay, so some of the other things that happen to women when these secondary sex characteristics start to develop. Women's hips begin to widen, pubic hair begins to develop, fat deposits start to emerge, and then there's further growth and development of the uterus, vagina, and ovaries, right? Again, those primary sex characteristics are developing as well. Okay, so those are the development of secondary sex characteristics that we see in women. For men, we see some other characteristics develop. Adam's apple begins to develop. Man's voice starts to deepen. Facial and chest hair develop. Pubic hair begins to develop. A man's skin typically becomes coarser. Their skin texture does. There's a large increase in height. Okay. Some of the issues that happen as the embryo starts to grow. Gonads develop 5 months after the sort of sexual differentiation becomes an issue or starts happening. We see chromosomes that sort of determine whether we see female hormones or male hormones begin to be released. So we talk about these as sort of female hormones, and we talk about them as male hormones. Do men have estrogen in their body? Yes. Do women have androgen in their body? Yes. What we have is we have these hormones in differing levels. Men have androgens at much greater levels than women do, and women have estrogens at much greater levels than men do. Okay, so we talk about these as female and sex hormones, but keep in mind that everybody has these. We just have them at very different levels in our body. Okay, and who enters puberty first, boys or girls? On average. It's girls. About 2 years sooner than boys. Girls enter into puberty. We talk about menarche, right? Development of a period for women. For men, it's often referred to, or for boys, it's referred to as spermarchy, right? The production of sperm developing in men, right? So again, we have that sort of 23rd pairing of chromosomes that determines usually whether we have development according to the male pattern or the female pattern, okay? That XY or XX. Okay, so if you think about the sexuality we're just talking about as the sort of physical side of human sexuality, gender again is the sort of psychological side of human sexuality. Our gender then, right? When we talk about gender identification, we're talking about those sort of psychological aspects of either being male or female. So sex being a sort of birth, right? Sex characteristics that we have. Gender being that sort of psychological aspect of how one identifies. When we're talking about gender roles, right? We have cultural expectations for what is masculine behavior and what is feminine behavior. It includes things like attitudes, right? We have expectations for the attitudes men would hold and the attitudes women women should hold. We have actions, right? Literally behaviors that we expect men to engage in and behaviors that we expect women to engage in. We have expectations for personality, right? What it is at a personality level men should be like and what women should be like, right? So we have these societal expectations, and typically they're very culturally bound for what it is men should be like and what it is that women should be like in their attitudes, their behaviors, and the sort of personality traits that we expect them to have. When we have this socialization, right, this expectation for what it should be like to be masculine or to be feminine, this is what we're talking about with gender roles. What the culture we grow up in tells us men and women should be like. Okay, so gender typing refers to the sort of process where people start to acquire gender role characteristics. Our gender identity is as an individual, our sense of being either male or female. We've talked a bit about this already, right? This idea of being transgender, where we have somebody whose sense of gender identity, how they psychologically identify, does not match their sort of external experience or the sort of chromosomal makeup. So we have somebody whose psychological identification does not match the physical aspect here, okay? Thinking about human sexuality as encompassing a physical side as well as simultaneously a psychological side makes the understanding and experience of transgender individuals, I think, makes understanding that much easier for many people, right? The transgendered issues surrounding transgendered individuals is becoming more and more of a frequent cultural topic, right? With like Caitlyn Jenner, the lead singer of Against Me, these transgendered individuals who are sort of having a loud voice culturally, right? And the woman on what's the show I'm thinking of? Orange is the New Black, right? Orange is the New Black, right? Yeah. Right. So these people who are starting to have a voice in the media at greater sort of frequency, right? We see issues revolving transgender individuals becoming much more common. Okay, so what can impact sort of gender? We have biological influences that certainly play a role, right? We have chromosomes, we have hormones, we have evolutionary selection that has become an issue. We have environmental influences, right? Parenting can be a very strong influencer when it comes to things like gender. People who have very traditional, or very conservative expectations for what boys should be like or what girls should be like have a very strong ability to impact their kids' gender identity development. And then of course culture, right? We have individualistic societies that have high standards of living that tend to be much more accepting of non-traditional gender roles, especially for women. We are much more strict for men who adopt non-traditional gender roles than we are for women who adopt non-traditional gender roles. Social learning theory. argues that our gender identity, the development of how we perceive ourselves, is formed through reinforcement of appropriate gender behavior, as well as imitation that we sort of engage in for gender models, right? So reinforcement. A child, a young boy who puts on his mom's high heels and walks around the house. How could reinforcement or punishment play a role here for this kid? What might dad do? What? Alright, so dad's gonna get upset and yell at him for what he's doing, right? Might dad sort of start to put the boundaries on what is acceptable behavior for me to engage in as a boy? Absolutely, right? So it's reinforcement experiences. Looking at gender models. What do mom and dad do? Right? Do we have a household that has sort of traditional gender roles? Meaning mom does the cooking every meal. Dad doesn't really do much in the way of indoor household maintenance. Dad's always outside doing taking the trash out, mowing the grass. Right? So that's what we're talking about for a kid who has these gender models. Right? Expectations for what boys should do and what girls should do. Right? So do we have sort of models that meet the traditional gender roles? Or do kids have models that maybe break the traditional roles? So maybe we have more egalitarian roles here with mom and dad. So dad does do some of the cooking, right? Behaviors that sort of cross the traditional boundary lines. There's a lot of work right now that suggests men who have lived as bachelors, when they get married, are much more likely to engage in egalitarian behaviors than men who never lived alone, went from living with their mom to living with somebody to marrying somebody. What's the experience that a bachelor has that may change their perception of sort of behaviors for men and women? Yeah.
They have to do stuff for themselves.
Yeah. They've got to do stuff for themselves, right? They've got to do their own laundry. They have to do their own cooking. They live by themselves, right? That experience may be really good in terms of starting to break down these general expectations that people have. All right. Gender schema theory argues that as a child develops, we create this mental pattern, right? We've talked about these schemas before. Through our experiences, we have these expectations, these sort of mental maps that we create for what it is to be male or what it is to be female. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And they organize all this information about what they observe other people doing, the learned behaviors that they have figured out from watching people, or what they have experienced on their own. Right? Learning through this interaction with the world around them creates these sort of mental templates for what it is that boys should be like and what it is that girls should be like. Right? And it starts small. For a lot of kids, they don't understand that that person who has long hair is a boy. Right? Because they have a very sort of unsophisticated mental template that has created, right? In their world, who has long hair? What? Women, right? So anyone who has long hair is a woman. Anyone who has short hair is a man, right? So kind of a very basic example of how this sort of gender schema theory plays a role here. Like these mental patterns that develop as we interact with the world around us. Okay, the problem with these developments, right, is that we start to create these stereotypes. These concepts that we develop about an individual or a group of people, often based on very sort of superficial or irrelevant characteristics, right? So stereotypes. We have stereotypes about all